Captain Theros had always believed that if the universe could be summed up in one concept, it was this: the universe doesn't care about you. It was a cosmic truth she was reminded of every time she looked out at the swirling void from the observation deck of Etha's cradle. Right now, though, she wasn't concerned about the universe's apathy. She was more concerned about the rogue terraforming device barreling toward the station like a drunk uncle at a wedding, with just as much grace and unpredictability. "Someone want to tell me why our latest attempt at playing gods has gone to shit?" Theros asked, her voice echoing in the steel corridors, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. Lieutenant Jax, the station's engineer, scratched his stubbly chin and shrugged. "Maybe it's because we outsourced the coding to that guy on Luna. You know, the one who promised us cutting-edge algorithms for half the price. Turns out he was more cutting-edge in BS than in AI programming." Theros pinched the bridge of her nose. "I knew we shouldn't have trusted someone named Cosmic Coder 69. Hindsight's 2020, Jax replied, a sardonic smile playing at his lips. "Or in this case, 2032. Meredith, the comms officer, chimed in from her console, her voice a deadpan drawl. "Do we have a plan, or are we just going to sit here and watch it turn us into a new crater?" Theros glanced at the display screen showing the trajectory of the terraforming device, which was less a straight line and more a drunken stagger. "Jax, can you override it?" "Sure, Captain." "Let me just whip out my magic wand," Jax replied, rolling his eyes. "It's got as much of a brain as a lobotomized toaster. Best I can do is try to hack it from here and hope it decides to take a nap instead of a nosedive." "That's comforting," Meredith muttered, twirling a strand of her neon blue hair. She had dyed it last week when she lost a bet with Theros, who had predicted correctly that their latest resupply shipment would be delayed due to, what else? Bureaucratic incompetence. "Naps are nice," offered Dax, the station's medical officer, who had been silently sipping his synthetic coffee in the corner. "I could use one right now, in fact. Dax, I swear if you fall asleep before that thing either crashes into us or we miraculously save our sorry asses, I'll inject you with enough caffeine to jumpstart a starship," Theros warned, half joking, half serious. Dax raised his mug in a mock toast. "To caffeinated miracles." Back at his console, Jax was typing furiously, muttering curses under his breath. "If this doesn't work, we might have to go with Plan B." "What's Plan B?" Theros asked. "Pray to whatever gods are listening and then run like hell," Jax said, tapping one last key with a flourish. "Okay, I've sent the override signal. With any luck, the device will think it's supposed to expand the atmosphere of an asteroid somewhere else." The bridge fell silent as they watched the display. The red blip representing the rogue device continued its erratic path, wobbling like a toddler on a sugar high. "Come on, you piece of trash," Meredith whispered, as if her words might sway the circuitry. Then, miraculously, or perhaps just by sheer chance, the device's trajectory began to shift. Instead of heading toward Etha's cradle, it veered off, aiming for the empty void beyond. "Looks like it worked," Jax said, an edge of surprise in his voice. "I can't believe it actually." He was interrupted by the sudden blaring of alarms. "Spoke too soon," Meredith sighed. "What now?" Jax scanned his console, a frown deepening on his face. "There's a second device. It must have been in tandem with the first, a fail-safe." "Of course there is," Theros muttered. "Nothing in life is ever simple, is it?" "Not in this quadrant," Dax said, standing up and stretching. "Well, at least it keeps things interesting." "Define interesting," Meredith said, her fingers flying over the keyboard to bring up data on the second device. "Is it the kind of interesting where we all die, or just the kind where we lose a limb or two?" "Let's aim for the latter," Theros said. "Jax, can you do the same override trick again?" "I can try," he replied, already diving back into the code. "But the second device might be more sophisticated. The first was likely a decoy, something to keep us busy while the real threat sneaks up behind us." "Great," Theros muttered. "We're the universe's punching bag and it's not pulling any punches today." As Jax worked, Meredith kept an eye on the screens. "This one's moving faster," she noted. "If it hits, it'll do more than just dent our pride." "Nice to know it's taking its job seriously," Theros said. "Can we hail it? Maybe if we just talk to it, it'll decide we're not worth the effort." "I think it's past the point of negotiation," Dax said, "unless you've got a way to reason with a hunk of metal programmed to terraform us into oblivion." "Worth a shot," Theros said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Jax, put me through to the device." "You're on," Jax said, shaking his head as he worked. "But don't expect a response. It's not like we're dealing with a rogue diplomat." Theros leaned into the mic. "This is Captain Theros of Etha's Cradle. If there's any intelligence on board, I'd like to negotiate a peaceful resolution. You're currently on a collision course and we'd prefer not to end up as space dust. Please respond." The comms crackled with static, a mocking silence that said more than words ever could. "Guess it doesn't feel chatty," Meredith said. "Figures," Theros replied, cutting the transmission. "Jax, any progress?" "Working on it," Jax replied, his fingers a blur on the keyboard. "This one's got more firewalls than a paranoid accountant's database." A tense silence fell over the bridge. Even Dax had stopped drinking his coffee, a sign of just how serious the situation had become. Then, without warning, the station shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. "What the hell was that?" Theros demanded, picking herself up from the floor. "Proximity alert," Meredith said, her voice unusually tight. "It's close, too close." "Jax," Theros barked. "I'm trying," Jax snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. "Damn thing's got more layers than my grandmother's lasagna." Meredith glanced over at Theros, her eyes betraying a flicker of fear. "If this doesn't work, we need to evacuate, now." Theros nodded, a grim smile on her lips. "Right, everyone to escape pods." "They're not exactly luxurious," Dax pointed out, following the others towards the exit. "But they'll keep us from being atomized." "Comfort was never our top priority," Theros said. "Survival is." As they hurried down the corridor, the station groaned and trembled again, the metal walls echoing ominously. "Just another day in paradise," Jax muttered, leading the charge. The escape pods were small, cramped, and about as welcoming as a prison cell. But they were their best shot at getting out alive. "Everyone in," Theros ordered, hustling her crew into the pods. "I'll stay here and try to buy us some time." "Captain," Jax began, but Theros cut him off. "That's an order, Jax. Get moving. If I can't stop it, at least I can make sure you guys get away." Jax hesitated, then nodded, clapping Theros on the shoulder. "You're crazy, you know that." "I prefer bold," Theros replied with a wry smile. "Now go." With her crew safely in the pods, Theros returned to the bridge, her mind racing as she tried to think of a last-ditch effort to stop the device. Sure, the universe didn't care about her, but she wasn't about to roll over and die without a fight. Not today. As the alarms blared and the station shivered under the impending impact, Theros grabbed hold of the manual controls, her fingers steady despite the chaos around her. "All right, you mechanical bastard," she muttered under her breath. "Let's see if you're ready to tango with me." With a deep breath, she initiated the station's emergency maneuvering thrusters, hoping against hope that it would be enough to dodge the oncoming disaster. And as the stars streaked past the observation window, she couldn't help but chuckle darkly. Because really, who would have guessed terraforming could be so exciting? As Captain Theros danced a perilous tango with the second terraforming device, her mind raced back to the briefing on these contraptions. They were supposed to be the technological messiah, transforming barren rocks into paradise faster than you could say colonization. The catch: they were coded by a team of underpaid technicians who couldn't program their way out of a paper bag. "Jax, get your ass back here," Theros barked into the comms, gripping the manual controls as if they were the only thing tethering her to sanity. "We need to figure out a way to stop this device without turning us into space confetti." Jax's voice crackled back, dripping with sarcasm. "Oh sure, I'll just pop back up there and have a chat with it over tea. Maybe it just needs a friend." Theros snorted despite herself. Save the tea party for after we've survived. I need your brain on this, not your sass. On my way, Jax replied, the sound of hurried footsteps echoing in the background. Meanwhile, Meredith, currently squished in an escape pod with Dax, decided to chime in. I can hear you, you know. If we bought these things from a flea market on Mars, maybe they came with a warranty we can cash in. Unlikely, Dax mused, adjusting his cramped seating. And I doubt whoever's responsible wants to take our call right now. Theros could picture Meredith rolling her eyes. Great, we're stuck with killer devices and no refunds. Jax stumbled back onto the bridge, skidding to a stop beside Theros. All right, give me the lowdown. What's the status? Bad, Theros said bluntly. We've got a terraforming device with a vendetta headed our way, and it seems to have taken lessons in stealth from a drunken ninja. Figures, Jax grumbled, pulling up the device's specs on the console. These things were designed to terraform planets in record time, remember, uninhabitable to habitable in a few weeks, but that was the sales pitch. The reality is a bit more. Explosive. Explosive, Theros raised an eyebrow. Yeah, explosive, Jax confirmed. Someone got the bright idea to give these devices military-grade capabilities as a precautionary measure, you know, just in case it needed to protect itself from, I don't know, an angry asteroid. Theros clicked her tongue. Who the hell greenlights a terraforming device that can go rogue and blow up a station? Jax shrugged. Same people who probably thought Cosmic Coder 69 was a reputable contractor. Theros sighed, watching the trajectory shift on the display screen as the device loomed closer. So how do we stop it? Well, Jax said, tapping furiously on his console, we could try reprogramming it to think it's already terraformed this area. Basically confuse the hell out of it so it just stops. Theros nodded slowly. Make it believe it's already succeeded. I like it. But can you do it before it turns us into a new crater? Jax cracked his knuckles. Only one way to find out. Keep those thrusters steady, Captain, and I'll work my magic. Theros kept the station in a precarious dance, the emergency thrusters protesting with every move. She could almost hear the station's structural integrity groaning like an elderly man getting out of a too comfy chair. But if they were going down, they'd go down fighting, or more accurately, faking it. Meredith, Theros called into the comms, get me everything you can on these devices. I need to know how they think, what their endgame is. On it, Captain, Meredith replied. I'll also send a scathing review to Cosmic Coder 69 while I'm at it. 1 star, tried to kill us. Don't forget to mention the lack of customer service, Dax added wryly. I mean, it's the least they could do while we wait to die. No death today, folks, Theros said, a determined edge in her voice. We outsmart the damn thing or die trying. As Jax continued his battle with the device's code, Meredith sent over everything she could dig up. Got it, Jax muttered, his eyes scanning the data. This thing's got layers of security that make sense only if you're completely insane or a cat playing with a laser pointer. The second option seems more likely, Theros quipped. Can you crack it? Jax nodded, a gleam of mania in his eyes. I'm already inside, just gotta find the right commands to convince it we're already the lush paradise it wants to create. More like a dystopian hellhole, Theros murmured, her hands steady on the controls. Hey, every paradise has its downsides, Jax shot back. As the minutes ticked by, the tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut with a laser. The alarms blared their incessant warning, and the proximity of the device was like a clock counting down to potential oblivion. Jax was typing faster now, sweat trickling down his brow as he sifted through the digital labyrinth. I think I've got it, he said at last, his voice tinged with triumph. I'm sending it the command now. If it works, it'll think we're already lush and green and back off. You better hope it doesn't have a taste for desert landscapes, Theros said, glancing at the screen. The seconds stretched into eternity as they waited to see if Jax's gambit would work. And then, the alarm ceased, the red light on the trajectory screen flickering and finally blinking out. Did it work? Meredith's voice crackled over the comms, a hint of disbelief in her question. Jax released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Looks like it. Theros allowed herself a small smile. See, I told you we could outsmart the universe, or well, the idiot who programmed these devices at least. A win's a win, Jax said, leaning back in his chair and wiping his brow. I can't believe that actually worked. Yeah, Theros said, relief flooding through her. But let's not make a habit of it. I prefer my terraforming devices tame and non-threatening. Or at the very least, programmable by someone whose username isn't a punchline, Jax added. Meredith snorted over the comms. Next time, maybe we should go with Terra Tech Pro or something less. Juvenile, Theros chuckled, allowing herself a moment of relaxation. I'll make sure to add that to the list of lessons learned. Is number 1 don't outsource to Luna? Dax asked, his voice light with humor. Definitely, Theros replied, turning off the manual controls and letting the station stabilize. And maybe number 2 is never assume technology won't try to kill you. Seems like a solid rule for life. Jax nodded. And number 3, always keep a good engineer on hand. You mean one who isn't a cosmic joke? Theros teased, only half serious. Exactly, Jax laughed. Preferably one who doesn't get their coding skills from a cereal box. As the crew began to regroup, emerging from their escape pods like a colony of disgruntled ants, Theros took a moment to gaze out of Etha's cradle. The universe was still indifferent, still vast and uncaring, but for now, they dodged another one of its cosmic curveballs. Theros, Meredith called, her tone once again businesslike. We've got a new message coming in from Central Command. Want me to patch it through? Let me guess, Theros said dryly. They're wondering why we attempted to tango with death when we could have called it a day and left. Sure, patch it through. Meredith tapped her console and the voice of Admiral Voss filled the bridge. His voice was as warm as a frozen asteroid and twice as welcoming. Captain Theros, this is Admiral Voss. We received word of your escapade with the terraforming devices. Care to explain why you didn't follow protocol and evacuate? Theros straightened, her voice firm but respectful. Admiral, with all due respect, the protocol didn't account for the devices having a secondary fail-safe or the incompetence of their programming. We adapted to the situation. Adapted, Voss repeated, his tone almost amused. Interesting choice of words, but you've resolved the issue. Yes, sir, Theros confirmed. We've convinced the device we're already terraformed. It won't be bothering us again. Good. I'm sending a team to assist with any repairs needed and to investigate the coding issue. There was a pause then, and Captain, next time, try to avoid near disasters. They're hard on the budget. Yes, sir, Theros replied, biting back a sarcastic retort. We'll aim for a less disastrous day. The comm line clicked off and Theros sighed, shaking her head. Well, guess we made an impression. At least we're still in one piece, Jax said, gathering his tools. Though I wouldn't mind less excitement next time. Or at least excitement with a side of sanity, Meredith added. I could definitely go for that. Theros nodded, a wry smile on her lips. Sanity sounds nice, but until then, let's keep everything in working order. Who knows what other surprises the universe, or our faulty tech, has in store? And with that, the crew set about the mundane task of checking systems and ensuring the station was still operational, their laughter echoing in the corridors and their spirits, for now, unbroken by the indifferent cosmos. The silent hum of the universe was disturbingly loud as Captain Theros stared out from Etha's cradle. The universe, in all its indifferent glory, seemed to have decided that giving them a break was against its policies. The terraforming device, having been lulled into a false sense of satisfaction, had apparently decided to leave a going-away present. Jax, who had barely wiped the sweat off his brow, was now back at his console, his fingers tapping at a frenetic pace. Captain, he said, not looking up, we might have another problem. Another one? Theros replied, her voice laced with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax audits. Do tell. Jax finally looked up, his face a picture of grim resignation. The device left a countdown, Seems like our tinkering triggered some kind of contingency. Of course it did, Theros muttered. Why wouldn't it have a contingency? I mean, a killer terraforming device without a self-destruct sequence is like a politician without a scandal. Yeah, and this one seems hell-bent on creating wormholes, Jax added, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The kind that could turn us into cosmic spaghetti. Meredith's voice crackled over the comms. Cosmic spaghetti. You sure know how to paint an appetizing picture, Jax. Hey, Jax shot back. At least it won't be gluten-free. Theros turned her attention back to the problem at hand, her brow furrowed in concentration. How long do we have before this thing decides to start its space-time origami? Jax glanced at the screen, his expression not particularly reassuring. Let's just say if you haven't written your will, now would be a good time to start. Right, Theros said, clapping her hands together. Let's disable this thing. I assume the usual method of turning it off and on again isn't going to work. Unfortunately not, Jax confirmed. But we might be able to reroute its power source, cut off the juice before it finishes its artistic interpretation of a black hole. Reroute the power, Dax chimed in, his voice incredulous. What are we, space electricians now? Hey, whatever works, Theros said, trying to maintain a semblance of optimism. Just find the damn power source and yank it. Wouldn't that be too easy? Meredith's voice was tinged with skepticism. I mean, we're not that lucky, are we? Luck's never been our strong suit, Theros replied dryly, but we can sure as hell try. Jax was already on the move, his hands a blur over the console as he attempted to trace the power lines. Okay, I've got a map of the power grid here. It's a mess, probably designed by the same genius who thought turning planets into Swiss cheese was a nifty idea. Well, find the main line and cut it, Theros instructed. Before this device makes a wormhole out of us and our lovely station. With the clock ticking, Jax and Dax both dove into the innards of the station, a tangled mass of wires and circuits. Theros stayed on the bridge, her fingers tapping nervously on the armrest of her chair. The alarms were still blaring, a cacophony that could drive anyone to madness, or at least make them crave a good set of earplugs. Meredith, Theros called into the comms, how are things on your end? Well, I'm not floating in space yet, if that's what you're asking, she replied. But I'd rather not test the vacuum anytime soon. Just hold tight, Theros said. We'll get this sorted. Down in the bowels of the station, Jax and Dax worked furiously, their faces flushed with effort. This is like trying to defuse a bomb with a spork, Jax grumbled, frustration coloring his words. Hey, at least with a bomb, you know what the red wire does, Dax replied, half joking, half serious. Yeah, and you usually only get blown up once with a bomb, Jax muttered, his hands finally finding the main power line. All right, I think I've got it. Please tell me you're sure, Theros said, her voice somehow managing to cut through the chaos. As sure as anyone can be when deciding whether to cut the blue wire or the red one, Jax quipped. But hey, who doesn't love a bit of trial and error? I'm voting no on the error, Dax said, his voice tense. All right, here goes nothing, Jax announced, and with a swift motion he severed the line. For a moment everything was still. The alarms stopped, the lights flickered, and for a brief second it seemed like they might have actually pulled it off. Then the station shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. What the hell was that? Theros demanded, gripping the sides of her chair. Bad news, Jax's voice came back, a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. Cutting the power line seems to have sped up the countdown. Of course it did, Theros groaned. Because why not? Back on the bridge, Theros stared at the display screen, which now showed the terraforming device's countdown running faster than a sprinter being chased by a bear. Okay, new plan, she said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. Ideas. How about we pray to whoever designed this mess? Meredith suggested, half in jest, half in desperation. Fat lot of good that'll do, Dax muttered, dusting himself off. Last I checked, the universe's customer service line was permanently busy. You get any ideas, Jax? Theros asked, her voice tinged with a weary determination. Well, there's one more thing we could try, he replied, his tone cautious. "We could try to overload it, make it burn out before it can finish its countdown." "Overload it," Theros repeated. "And how exactly do we do that without blowing ourselves up in the process?" "By channeling more power into it than it can handle," Jax explained. "Basically, we shove so much juice into it that it shorts out." "Sounds risky," Theros remarked. "Well, it's either that or we start collecting recipes for cosmic spaghetti," Jax said, his voice a mix of sarcasm and grim determination. "All right," Theros agreed. "Let's do it. But let's make sure we're still here to celebrate if it works." As Jax and Dax set about rerouting the station's power, Theros kept her gaze on the countdown, each second ticking away with the grace of a guillotine blade. "Meredith," she called over the comms, "how's your side looking?" "Still in one piece," Meredith replied. "But I'm ready to hightail it out of here if this goes south." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Theros said, though she hardly believed it herself. As the station's power lines were redirected, the lights flickered again, casting the bridge in a dim glow. Theros watched as the countdown continued its relentless march toward zero. "Okay," Jax's voice crackled over the comms, "we're ready here." "Just need your go-ahead, Captain." Theros took a deep breath, her fingers drumming a nervous tattoo on the armrest. "All right, Jax, do it." The silence that followed was suffocating, the anticipation thick enough to choke on. Then, with a decisive tap of a button, Jax sent a surge of power racing towards the device. For a moment, nothing happened. The countdown continued, oblivious to their efforts, and Theros could feel the tension ratcheting up another notch. Then, with a sound like metal tearing and electricity crackling, the display screen went dark. The alarms ceased their infernal wailing, leaving behind a silence more deafening than any noise. Did it work?" Meredith's voice asked tentatively over the comms. Jax's voice came back, a mix of incredulity and relief. "I think so. The device is offline." Theros let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank the stars. Maybe we should try for a less apocalyptic hobby next time." "Like knitting," Dax suggested, his voice light with humor, "or basket weaving. Something that doesn't involve potential cataclysmic destruction." Theros chuckled, the sound a welcome relief after the tension of the past few minutes. "Sounds like a plan. But right now, I think we've earned ourselves a break." As the crew began to emerge from their stations, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion, Theros allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. They'd survived another day in the chaotic dance of the universe, outmaneuvering its attempts to flatten them into non-existence. "Theros," Jax's voice came back, carrying with it a note of caution. "There's still some residual power readings coming from the device." Theros' smile faltered. "Residual readings, as in it's not completely dead." "Seems like it," Jax admitted. "We might want to keep an eye on it." "Great," Theros muttered, shaking her head, "because what we really needed was a persistent headache." "Hey," Meredith interjected, "at least it keeps things interesting." "Interesting," Dax laughed. "That's one way to put it." "All right, folks," Theros said, getting to her feet. "Let's get this station back in order and maybe figure out how to prevent future cosmic near-extinctions." "Sounds like a plan," Jax replied, his voice weary but determined. As they set about their tasks, Theros took one last look out into the indifferent expanse of the universe. It might not care whether they lived or died, but they did. And for now, that was enough. Theros paced the bridge, her boots making soft thuds on the metal floor. It felt like they'd just dodged a bullet only to find themselves staring down the barrel of another gun. The universe, a real comedian, always kept them on their toes. "Residual power readings, huh?" Theros muttered, more to herself than anyone. "Like the gift that keeps on giving, except it's really a bomb." Vex, the station's engineer who had the misfortune of looking like he'd slept in his uniform, probably because he had strolled in as if he was coming back from a leisurely breakfast. "Heard you guys had a party without me," he said, grinning like a cat with a mouth full of canary. "Yeah, you missed the fireworks," Theros replied, rolling her eyes. You're just in time for the grand finale. Got any bright ideas? Vex leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Well, if it's residual power, it's like that annoying song stuck in your head. You can't just ignore it. Gotta deal with it or it'll drive us all nuts. Got a plan then? Theros asked, her tone hopeful but laced with the skepticism of someone who's been burned one too many times. Well, Vex drawled, we could try diverting it into the nearest wormhole. You know, like sweeping dirt under the cosmic rug. Jax, still smarting from the last attempt at heroics, perked up. And how exactly do we steer a wormhole like it's a spaceship? Vex shrugged, a motion that seemed to say, don't blame me if it's a stupid idea. We don't have to steer the wormhole. Just gotta give the device a nudge in the right direction. A nudge, Theros repeated. Great in theory, but this thing's got a mind of its own. Yeah, but we've got brains, Vex replied, tapping his temple. And caffeine. Seriously, though, we might be able to set the station's thrusters to give it a push. Old-school problem-solving. Dax, who'd been lingering at his console like a reluctant student called to the front of the class, chimed in. So, let me get this straight. We're gonna turn this whole station into a giant fly swatter, basically, Vex nodded. Except instead of swatting, we're, coaxing, Theros laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. And if it doesn't work, then we get to find out what spaghettified really means, Vex replied with a grin that was either madness or bravery. Theros sighed, rubbing her temples. All right, let's give it a shot. Jax, you and Dax get the thrusters ready. Vex, you're on calculations. Let's make sure we're aiming at the right wormhole and not, I dunno, the sun. Meredith's voice piped over the comms, cheerful despite the chaos. If it helps, I've got a bottle of something strong in my locker. You know, in case we need a celebratory drink, or a last one, Dax muttered as he and Jax headed to the control room. Back at the bridge, Theros and Vex were surrounded by screens blinking with data that seemed designed to induce migraines. So, how do we find the right wormhole? Theros asked, her patience thinner than the station's hull. Vex pointed at the display, which helpfully showed several swirling voids like cosmic whirlpools. This chart's got the local anomalies mapped out. We just need one close enough to, well, dump our little problem. Theros nodded, squinting at the screen. And how do we know it's uninhabited? Vex gave her a sidelong glance. You want to send out invites. Dear aliens, please vacate the premises before we toss a bomb your way. Theros chuckled despite herself. Okay, I get it. Let's just hope this one's as empty as my grandmother's promises. Meanwhile, in the control room, Jax and Dax were elbows deep in the guts of the station's thruster controls. This is either gonna be brilliant or suicidal, Dax said, twisting a wrench with more optimism than skill. Probably both, Jax replied, wiping sweat from his brow. But if we manage to pull it off, we might just make history, as the idiots who survived by the skin of their teeth, Dax agreed. Think we'll get medals, probably a stern talking to, Jax snorted. Maybe a nice plaque commemorating our sheer dumb luck, Dax grinned. I'll take it. Back on the bridge, Theros was feeling the weight of command as if it was a physical burden. Her mind raced with scenarios, each one ending in various shades of disaster. But that was leadership for you, making the least catastrophic choice from a buffet of terrible options. All right, Vex, she said, watching him work. How long till we can make this thing dance depends on your definition of dance, Vex replied, tapping furiously at his console. We're lining up the shot, but it's gonna be close. Too close if you ask me, Theros nodded, her gaze hardening. Let's not think about the ifs, just the hows. Meredith's voice crackled over the comms again, her tone irreverent. Hey, Captain, if we pull this off, I vote we rename the station Lucky Bastard. Deal, Theros replied, a grin tugging at her lips. Let's make sure we live long enough to see the name change. Minutes ticked by like hours as the crew worked in a tense, focused silence. The station's systems shuddered and groaned, as if protesting the stress they were about to endure. Thrusters ready, Captain, Jax's voice announced over the comms. We're good to go on your command. Theros took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on her. All right, everyone. Let's light this candle. With a series of hurried commands, the station's thrusters roared to life, the entire structure vibrating with the force. Theros watched the display as the station began its slow pivot, aligning the device with the distant wormhole. "Easy does it," she murmured, as much to herself as to her team. "We're not in a race, folks." Vex monitored the trajectory, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We're lined up. Just make sure we don't overshoot it, or we'll be the ones taking a one-way trip." Theros nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. "All right, on my mark. 3, 2, 1. The command to fire the thrusters came with a jolt that rattled the teeth in Theros' skull. The station lurched, the force translated through every bulkhead and bolt. For a moment, it seemed like the plan was working. The device, now detached from the station, drifted toward the designated wormhole like a leaf caught in a breeze. "Keep it steady," Theros urged, her voice tight with nerves. But then, because the universe wasn't done having its fun, the display showed a new complication. A solar flare erupted from a neighboring star, the shockwave hurtling toward them with catastrophic intent. "Oh, for the love of Theros," began, but there was no time for complaints. "Captain," Jax shouted over the comms. "We've got a flare coming in hot." "Of course we do," Theros muttered, her mind racing. "Vex, can we boost the thrusters? We need to outrun that wave." "Already on it," Vex replied, fingers dancing across the controls. "But it's gonna be tight. Real tight." The station groaned under the strain, metal protesting the abuse but holding firm for now. The mass of energy loomed closer on the display like the universe's version of a rude gesture. Come on," Theros muttered, willing the station to move faster. "This isn't the time to play shy." The device drifted closer to the wormhole, but so did the wave, a relentless pursuer in this cosmic game of cat and mouse. "We're almost there," Vex reported, his voice tense. "Just a little more." The wormhole loomed larger, a swirling maw ready to swallow the wayward device. Theros held her breath, every muscle tense, her fingers white-knuckled on the armrest. Then, with a flicker and a flash, the device disappeared into the wormhole. The wave, cheated of its target, dissipated harmlessly in the void, its energy spent. The bridge was silent except for the hum of life support systems, the crew collectively exhaling the breath they'd been holding. Did we just pull that off?" Meredith asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Looks like it," Theros replied, a grin spreading across her face. "We might just be the luckiest bastards in the galaxy. Or the unluckiest, depending on your perspective," Dax chimed in, his voice laced with humor. "You know what the best part is," Jax said, his tone light. "No one died, always a bonus." Theros laughed, the sound rich and full, echoing around the bridge. "All right, folks. Let's get this station back in order. We've got a lot to fix and a new name to christen." As the crew set about their tasks, Theros took a moment to stare out into the void, her heart still pounding with the adrenaline of near disaster. The universe might be indifferent, but they weren't. And for now, they'd managed to keep it at bay. "Here's to us," she muttered, more to herself than anyone, "and to surviving another day." And maybe, just maybe, they'd get a few minutes' peace before the universe decided to throw another curveball their way. Because if there was one thing Theros had learned, it was this. In space, there was always another surprise lurking just around the corner. The plan was perfect in the way only a plan born of desperation can be. Perfect, that is, until it wasn't. The station's thrusters, wound up tighter than a politician's promises, finally gave out with a metallic groan that echoed through the hull like a death knell. Jax and Dax, still elbow-deep in the control room's greasy innards, exchanged a look that said, "We're toast." "Captain, we got a problem," Jax's voice crackled over the comms, each word punctuated by a worrying series of sparks and pops from the console. Theros swiveled her chair, dread pooling in her stomach. "Define problem. Thrusters are out," Jax replied, his tone as dry as the Martian dunes. "And unless we've got a magic wand somewhere, we're not pushing anything anywhere." Theros sighed, staring at the display screen where the wormhole loomed like an ominous eye. "Fantastic." She rubbed her temples, trying to stave off a headache that was quickly gathering momentum. Options, people, pray for divine intervention. Dax offered, grinning like the fool he sometimes pretended not to be. And maybe a backup plan, Theros added, her voice clipped. Just in case that doesn't pan out. Vex, ever the pragmatist, was already hunched over his console, his fingers a blur. We could try rerouting power from life support, but we'd be playing a real fun game of what kills us first. Yeah, let's avoid suffocation roulette for now, Theros replied. Her patience felt like the cheap code stitched into their problematic terraforming device, frayed and prone to catastrophic failure. Backup batteries. Meredith chimed in over the comms, her voice stubbornly cheerful, as if the universe wasn't making a mockery of their efforts. I mean, they're old, but they might have enough juice to give us a nudge. That's assuming they haven't turned into paperweights, Jack said, skepticism evident as he jiggled a stubborn wire. Vex looked up from his console, eyes pinched with concentration. Worth a shot, Captain. What's the worst that could happen? You mean aside from confirming our spot in the Dumbass Hall of Fame? Theros shot back, her lips twitching with a humorless smile. Exactly, Vex replied with a shrug. Nothing to lose except our dignity. And maybe our lives, but hey, who's counting? All right, let's do it, Theros said, making a decision that tasted like ash. Dax, get those batteries online. Meredith, keep monitoring that wormhole. We need to know if it decides to spit something back. Like a cosmic hairball, Meredith quipped, though her fingers danced over the controls with more urgency. The bridge fell into a tense silence, punctuated only by the hum of machinery and the distant clanging of Jack's and Dax's efforts. For all their bluster and bravado, the crew knew the stakes. Knew that their chances lay somewhere between slim and none. Hey, Vex, Theros called, trying to keep her voice steady. What's the story on that countdown? Vex's fingers tapped nervously against the console, a rapid staccato that mirrored his anxiety. Last check, 7 minutes. Maybe 6 if the universe is feeling particularly assholish. Theros swallowed hard, her mind racing. They had less time than it took to make a decent cup of coffee, and the universe wasn't about to offer a refill. Any chance we can stop it? She asked, despite knowing the answer. Vex shook his head, the motion resigned. Not unless you got a direct line to the tech gods. This thing's locked tighter than a miser's purse. Theros chuckled darkly, more out of sarcasm than amusement. Of course it is. Wouldn't want things to be too easy, would we? As the minutes ticked down, each second an unwelcome reminder of their impending doom, the crew worked in feverish determination. Desperation gave birth to an odd sort of clarity, bold, stupid decisions that might just save their skins, or end up plastering them across the stars. Backup batteries are hot, Jax shouted, his voice carrying a mix of triumph and disbelief. We've got power, Theros allowed herself a moment of hope, a brief flicker of light in an otherwise pitch-black situation. All right, people. Let's see if we can pull a miracle out of our collective asses. Vex, ever the cynic, gave a grim smile. Just another day at the office, huh, wouldn't have it any other way, Theros replied, though the lie tasted bittersweet. The bridge came alive with a chorus of hums and beeps as systems rebooted, the station's thrusters sputtering back to life like a dying engine given one last jolt. The crew held their breath, waiting, hoping. And then the universe decided it wasn't done with them yet. Captain, we've got a problem, Meredith's voice crackled, her usual cheer tempered by the grim reality. The device, it's activating. What? Now? Theros shouted, her eyes widening in disbelief. Yeah, turns out when it rains, it pours, Vex muttered, his fingers flying over the controls in a desperate attempt to halt the countdown. The screen displayed the device, its lights blinking in a sequence that was the cosmic equivalent of a middle finger. They were out of time, out of options, and the universe seemed hell-bent on making sure they knew it. All right, everyone, Theros said, her voice fierce and defiant. We're not going down without a fight. Dax, see if you can give it another push. Vex, keep those calculations coming. Meredith, keep an eye on that wormhole. Roger that, Meredith replied, her voice steady despite the madness around her. Let's make this happen, people. The The station strained once more, metal groaning as if in sympathy with their plight. The thrusters roared, the station shuddering under the strain. The wormhole loomed, an indifferent maw watching them with disinterest. "Come on, damn it," Theros whispered, willing the universe to give them a break for once. The device inched closer to the wormhole, a dance of inches that seemed to stretch into eternity. Every second felt like a lifetime, every breath a gamble. Then, in a moment of cruel irony, the wormhole began to close, its swirling edges folding in on themselves as if to deny them even this last hope. "You've got to be kidding me," Theros muttered, her heart dropping into her stomach. The universe, it seemed, wasn't kidding. It was dead serious. "Jax, Dax, anything," she called, desperation lacing her words. "Thrusters are maxed out," Captain Jax replied, his voice tight with strain. "We're out of tricks." The wormhole continued to collapse, its edges shrinking like a noose tightening around their fate. "Vex?" Theros asked, though she knew the answer. "We're done," Vex said quietly, his hands falling away from the controls. "We're out of time." Theros closed her eyes, the weight of failure heavy on her shoulders. They'd done everything they could, and it hadn't been enough. The universe had played its hand, and they'd been found wanting. "Captain," Meredith's voice cut through the silence, a lifeline in the darkness. "If we're going out, I just want to say, it's been an honor." Theros opened her eyes, looking around at her crew, her family. "The honor's been mine," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. And as the wormhole vanished, taking their last hope with it, Theros promised herself one thing: if they were going down, they'd go down fighting. The bridge was silent except for the low hum of machinery. The crew watched as the device neared activation, the countdown ticking down with merciless precision. "It's been a hell of a ride," Dax said, breaking the silence with a wry smile. Theros nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. "Yeah, it has." The countdown hit 0. In that moment the universe held its breath, the crew bracing for the end, and then, nothing, no explosion, no cataclysmic event. Just the steady hum of the station and the blinking lights of the device, now dormant and silent. Guys," Jax said, breaking the stunned silence. "Did we survive?" Vex checked his console, disbelief etched across his features. "Yeah, looks like we did." Theros blinked, trying to process the turn of events. "What the hell just happened beats me," Vex replied, shaking his head. "Maybe the universe decided to cut us some slack after all, or maybe it's saving us for something worse," Dax suggested with a dark chuckle. Theros laughed, the sound rich with relief. "Whatever the reason, we're still here. Let's not question it." As the crew began the slow process of restoring order to the station, Theros allowed herself a moment to breathe, to savor the unexpected victory. "Captain," Meredith's voice came over the comms, her tone curious. "Yeah," Theros replied, still dazed. "What do we call this move? The lucky escape?" "The cosmic dodge," Theros thought for a moment, then grinned. "Let's call it what it is. The universe can't handle us." The crew laughed, their spirits lifted despite the lingering threat of disaster. They'd faced the void and lived to tell the tale, and that was more than enough for now. Theros gazed out into the endless expanse of space, a small smile playing on her lips. For all its indifference, the universe hadn't beaten them yet. And as long as they had each other, maybe it never would. "All right, folks," she said, turning back to her crew. "Let's get back to work. We've got a station to fix and a whole lot of stories to tell." As they set about their tasks, the station a hum of activity and life, Theros felt a sense of hope she hadn't dared to before. They'd survived their darkest hour, and maybe, just maybe, they'd live to see the dawn. In the end, that's all any of them could ask for. The universe had pulled one hell of a prank on them, and Captain Theros was still waiting for the punchline. She leaned against the console, rubbing her temples as the rest of the crew absorbed their unexpected reprieve. The wormhole had winked out of existence like a bad magic trick, leaving behind an unsettling quiet. It was in that eerie silence that Navigator Juno, who'd been sitting cross-legged on the floor with a cup of stale instant coffee, spoke up. "You know," she said, her voice a mix of bemusement and caffeine-induced clarity, "that device's logic is about as straightforward as a politician's promise." Theros glanced over, the corners of her mouth twitching. "What's your point, Juno?" "We've established it's a death trap wrapped in a mystery wrapped in a big screw you." Juno sipped her coffee, grimacing at the taste but soldiering on like a trooper. "My point, Captain, is that it's chaotic because we're chaotic. Human logic doesn't follow a straight line, more like a tangled ball of yarn after a cat's finished with it. Speak for yourself," Dax quipped, leaning back in his chair. "I'm a paragon of order and sanity. Right?" Vex snorted, his fingers still drumming that nervous beat on the console. "That's why your last 5 relationships ended with restraining orders." "For the record," Dax retorted, "that was only 3. Still counts as a winning streak in my book." Theros let them bicker for a moment, savoring the banter like a palate cleanser after a mouthful of disaster. "All right, back on track, people. Juno, what's your angle here?" Juno set her cup down, her eyes glinting with an idea that might just be crazy enough to work or get them all killed. "But hey, at this point, 6 of 1. I think we should try and feed it human patterns. Randomness. Use its own chaos against it, feed it human patterns." Theros echoed, skeptical but intrigued. "Like playing rock, paper, scissors with a nuclear reactor." "Exactly," Juno nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "If it's responding to logical sequences, let's throw it a curveball. Make it dance to our tune." "Lovely idea," Meredith chimed in, her fingers never stopping their dance across the controls. "But what happens if the device decides to stop playing nice and goes full homicidal robot on us?" "Well, then," Juno shrugged, "we'll have the best damn fireworks display in the galaxy." "Someone's feeling optimistic," Jack said, rejoining from the bowels of the station with a sheaf of wires slung over his shoulder like a makeshift bandolier. "But I'm with you. I'd rather go out knowing we tried everything, even if it's the kind of plan you come up with after one too many shots at the bar." Theros weighed the options, or lack thereof, with a grim smile. "We're not exactly flush with alternatives, are we? All right, Juno, let's see if we can out-crazy the device." The crew sprang into action with a renewed vigor, the kind you find at the bottom of the last hope barrel. Juno started inputting the most erratic patterns she could think of, drawing from humanity's greatest hits of randomness, jazz riffs, stock market fluctuations, and whatever the hell passed for art in the post-digital age. "Captain, this is either going to be genius or crash and burn so hard our remains will be cosmic roadkill," Vex said, adjusting his calculations to accommodate the new inputs. "Either way, at least we'll go down swinging," Theros replied, her voice carrying the resolve of someone who'd played too many losing hands to fold now. As Juno fed the device its chaotic meal, the station's lights flickered in a macabre dance. Each blink was a heartbeat skipped, each dimming a reminder of the knife edge they were walking. "Feels like I'm stuck inside a disco ball programmed by a sadist," Dax muttered, squinting at the erratic light show. "If this works, I'll buy you all the drinks you want at the nearest spaceport dive," Theros promised, though she had no idea where the nearest bar even was, or if they'd ever make it there. Juno kept at it, her fingers a blur of motion as she coaxed the device with the erratic logic of human thought. The countdown resumed, ticking away like a time bomb with a sense of humor. "All right, let's see if this bucket of bolts has a taste for jazz," Juno said, hitting the final sequence with a flourish. For a moment, nothing happened. The universe held its breath, waiting to see if their gamble would pay off or if they'd be reduced to a cautionary tale for future spacefarers. Then the device emitted a series of low, ominous beeps, followed by a rapid click-clack like a typewriter gone feral. The lights settled into a steady glow, a small sign that maybe, just maybe, they'd managed to confuse it into submission. "Did it work?" Meredith asked, her voice a mix of hope and disbelief. "The device's readouts have stabilized," Jax confirmed, staring at the console as if expecting it to sprout legs and walk away. "We might have actually pulled it off." "Well, I'll be damned," Theros muttered, feeling a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying start to lift. "Nice job, Juno. You just might have saved our asses." who knew being unpredictable could work in our favor. Juno grinned, basking in the rare glow of victory. Let's not get cocky, Vex cautioned, but even he couldn't hide the relief in his voice. The universe might still have a few curveballs left. Theros nodded, her gaze drifting back to the endless expanse outside the viewport. True, but for now, we're still here. And as long as we're breathing, we keep fighting. The crew let out a collective sigh, the sound a mix of relief, exhaustion, and the kind of camaraderie that comes from staring into the abyss and laughing anyway. All right, folks, Theros said, rallying her crew once more. Let's get this station back to something resembling operational. We've got a lot of work ahead and probably more chaos to untangle. As they dove back into the chaos, a strange sense of peace settled over the bridge. They'd stared down the void and come out the other side, battered but unbroken. For now, that was enough. And as they worked, the hum of the station steadying around them, Theros caught herself smiling. Because in a universe that couldn't care less, they'd carved out a small victory. And in the grand scheme of things, that was more than they dared to hope for. Hey, Captain, Dax called, his voice almost playful. Next time you plan a near-death adventure, can we at least make it somewhere with better coffee? Theros laughed, the sound surprising even herself. Deal, Dax. First round's on me. Assuming we get there, Jax added, but even his skepticism felt lighter now. With the station coming alive around them, the crew pushed forward, buoyed by the knowledge that they'd managed to snatch victory from the jaws of certain doom. And that, perhaps, was the greatest trick of all. As the Iors passed and they wrangled the station back into shape, Theros allowed herself a moment to reflect. The universe might be indifferent, cruel, and chaotic, but it had underestimated the stubbornness of a crew with nothing left to lose. Let's keep moving, people, she ordered, her voice firm and resolute. The universe can't take us down that easily. The crew responded with renewed energy, their laughter and banter filling the bridge as they worked. They were a ragtag bunch of misfits, but they'd become more than just a crew, they were a family. And family didn't go down without a fight. As the station hummed its familiar tune, Theros felt a sense of hope she hadn't dared to before. They were still afloat, still fighting. And as long as they had that maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to keep the universe at bay. The bridge of Etha's cradle was a symphony of organized chaos. If you could call anything organized on this tin, can hurtling through space on a wing and prayer. Captain Theros stood at the center, a conductor in a concert of impending doom, with strains of gallows humor in every note. So, we've managed to confuse the universe's most expensive toaster with jazz, Theros murmured, her eyes fixed on the display screen. Let's see if it's got a taste for abstract art too. Or maybe we're just poking it with a stick and hoping it doesn't bite, Jax added, returning to his post with a fresh set of scorch marks on his coveralls. He'd been wrestling with the station's wiring. The wiring was winning. Look, it was either this, or let it make us the universe's newest debris field, Juno pointed out, still typing furiously as if her fingers could outrun the chaos coming for them. I say feeding it chaos with a side of existential dread is a good compromise. Speaking of compromises, Vex interjected, tapping away at the console. Any chance we can divert the residual power into something a little less explodey? Not unless you enjoy turning into a light show, Meredith chimed in, her smile as bright as the sparking terminals she was tinkering with. Theros rubbed her temples. All right, folks. Let's aim to not become cosmic roadkill today, shall we? The crew moved with an urgency that only came with the knowledge that their lives were hanging by a thread as thin as their collective patience. Juno's idea to feed the device human randomness had worked, at least in the short term. But now came the fun part, redirecting the power before it decided to turn the station into an oversized firecracker. Jax, how are those thrusters looking? Theros called, casting a hopeful glance his way. Like a first-year engineering project, Jax grumbled, but they'll hold. Probably. No promises if we actually try to move this thing, though. Great, just what I wanted to hear, Theros said, rolling her eyes. Let's not try any fancy flying unless we want to become the galaxy's newest shooting star. If it's any consolation, Dax piped up, adjusting his seatbelt as if that would help in a vacuum. I think we've got just enough power to keep the lights on and the coffee hot. Priorities, right, Dax? If we survive this, I'll buy you the best cup of coffee in the quadrant, Juno promised, her tone laced with irony. Hell, I'll even spring for the fancy beans. The countdown on the device was still ticking away, but at least now it wasn't screaming at them in binary. The station's systems were stabilizing, albeit grudgingly. All right, folks, Theros said, taking a deep breath. Let's see if we can't coax this hunk of metal back to life without it trying to kill us. With a nod, the crew launched into action. Jax dove into the belly of the beast, coaxing wires and circuits into a semblance of cooperation. Meredith danced her fingers over the controls, rerouting power like a conductor with a baton. Vex hammered away at the console, calculations pouring out as fast as he could think them. Captain, Jax called over the comms, voice threaded with urgency. I've rerouted what I can, but we need to vent this extra power before it decides to fry us from the inside out. Suggestions? Theros asked, voice steady despite the creeping dread. Throw it into the reactor, Jax replied, the kind of suggestion that would usually get you laughed out of a space academy. It's the only part built to handle that kind of load. Won't that just make it explode faster? Dax questioned, skepticism dripping from every word. Not if we time it right, Jax said, sounding far more confident than he should have. It's like threading a needle. While on fire, just what I needed today, Theros muttered. All right, Jax, Meredith, Vex. You're on threading duty. Why do I feel like this is going to be one of those it seemed like a good idea at the time moments? Meredith asked, though she was already setting up the calculations. Because it probably is, Vex answered without missing a beat in his work. They worked in concert, each step choreographed in an unspoken dance, as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. And maybe they had, if you counted each crisis they'd survived as practice. Hold onto your butts, Jax called, his voice crackling over the comms with static and determination. Here goes nothing. The station shuddered as the reactor gulped down the excess power, momentarily flickering as if considering the merits of catastrophic failure. But against all odds, the systems held. The lights glowed with newfound vigor, the hum of the station settling into a steady thrum. Did we actually do it? Meredith asked, disbelief coloring her voice. Looks like it, Jax confirmed, a wry grin audible even over the crackling comms. We've officially out-crazed ourselves. Congratulations, folks, Theros said, a laugh bubbling up despite the odds. We're not dead. Yet, the crew let out a collective breath they didn't realize they'd been holding. Against all sense and reason, they'd pulled it off. They'd faced down the universe's worst joke and survived to tell the tale. I've gotta say, Dax remarked, stretching back in his chair, I wouldn't have bet on us. But I'm glad someone did. The universe might not care, Juno added, sipping her now-cold coffee with a grimace, but we showed it we're not just here to be played with. Exactly, Theros said, her gaze sweeping over the crew. We might be a bunch of misfits, but damn if we're not the best misfits around. With the immediate threat averted, the station settled into an eerie calm. The danger had passed for now, but the universe was always ready with another punchline. Let's get this place cleaned up, Theros ordered, her tone carrying the weight of a leader who'd seen too much but wasn't ready to give up just yet. We've got a lot of work ahead, and maybe a better cup of coffee, Jax suggested, stripping off his burnt coveralls and watching them smolder slightly in the artificial gravity. Assuming we can find a machine that doesn't try to kill us, Vex quipped, shutting down his console with a flourish. As the crew got to work setting the station back to rights, Theros lingered at the viewport. The stars stretched out before them, silent witnesses to their defiance. In a universe that was cold, uncaring, and often cruel, they'd forged a small victory through sheer stubbornness and a dash of madness. Hey, Captain, Dax called from across the bridge, a grin in his voice. Think we've earned a drink? Theros chuckled, the sound surprising in its warmth. I think we've earned a whole damn bottle, Dax. The crew laughed, the sound echoing through the bridge. They'd stared into the abyss and laughed anyway, and that perhaps was the greatest triumph of all. With the station humming along, Theros allowed herself a rare moment of introspection. They'd survived by being exactly what they were, chaotic, unpredictable, and stubborn as hell. "Here's to us," she said softly, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. "May the universe underestimate us every time." As the bridge buzzed with the sounds of repairs and renewed life, Theros couldn't help but smile. They might be floating through the void on borrowed time, but they'd made that time count. And in a universe indifferent to their existence, that was a victory in itself. "All right," she called, rallying her crew once more. "Let's keep this show on the road. We've got a universe to surprise." The crew responded with a cheer, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they'd managed to outsmart fate once again. As Theros watched her crew, she knew one thing for certain: they were a family. Scrappy, irreverent, a little crazy, but a family nonetheless. And as long as they had that, they'd face whatever the universe threw their way together. And so, with the stars as their witness and the station humming its steady tune, they pressed on into the void. In space, no one could hear you scream, but they could definitely hear you laugh. The ether's cradle was finally quiet. Not the ominous kind of quiet, like the silence before the universe decides to yank the rug from under you, but the blessed sort that follows a storm. Captain Theros stood on the bridge, the familiar hum of the station's systems a comforting backdrop, like a lullaby sung by a slightly drunk uncle. "Well, we didn't explode. That's something," Theros noted, glancing around at her crew. They were back at their stations, half battered, half elated, and entirely too smug for Theros's comfort. But damn it, they'd earned it. "Exploding would have been quicker, though," Jax said, still wrestling a stubborn panel back into place. "If you're into that, cheer up, Jax," Meredith chimed in, flicking a few switches with the air of someone who knew exactly which button to press to make life a bit weirder. "We might have lived to see another crisis. Never thought I'd be glad to have more problems," Vex added, his fingers flying over the console, recalibrating sensors with the speed of a man who knew he'd probably have to do it all again in an IOR. "Let's not try to attract the universe's attention, all right," Theros said. She tapped a finger on the display screen, now mercifully devoid of any immediate threats. "We've got enough trouble without inviting new ones." The bridge felt almost cozy, like a ramshackle bar where everyone knew each other's drinks and deepest regrets. Dax, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who'd survived yet another impossible situation, raised an imaginary glass. "To the universe. May it continue to underestimate the power of caffeine and sheer bloody-mindedness." "Cheers to that," Juno agreed, cradling her lukewarm coffee like it was the elixir of life. "Though I'd still kill for a real cup of joe." "Careful, Juno. That's how you end up on the wrong side of a galactic tribunal," Meredith teased. "Or at least with a very angry barista." A ripple of laughter spread through the crew, the kind of laughter that comes only after narrowly avoiding disaster by the skin of your teeth, and maybe a touch of sheer luck. Theros watched them, an odd mix of pride and exasperation bubbling up inside her. They were her crew, her mad, brilliant crew, and somehow they'd made it through another round. "All right, enough basking in our own genius," Theros said, though her tone was more fond than firm. "Let's talk about what went right, what went wrong, and how we ensure we don't have to do this again. Wouldn't that be a novel idea?" Vex replied, shutting down his console with a satisfied sigh. "I'm all for not having to save the station from becoming cosmic confetti again. My favorite kind of plan is the one where we don't die," Jax added, finally closing the stubborn panel with a decisive thud. "I'm a fan of the classics," Theros nodded. "So, let's start with the terraforming device. What in the hell happened there, underpaid technicians? I'd wager," Juno said dryly, setting her coffee down. "They probably left a few features in the code. Like unexpected wormholes. Remind me to send a strongly worded complaint to management," Theros said, sarcasm dripping from every word. and maybe a bill for emotional damages. The real question, Meredith said, spinning her chair to face the others, is how we can make sure we're not caught with our pants down next time. Pants are overrated, Dax quipped, earning a few chuckles. But I agree. We need a contingency plan for our contingency plans. Exactly, Theros agreed. Jax, what can we do to reinforce the station's systems? Make sure we're not relying on hope and caffeine. Well, short of replacing every piece of hardware, which we can't do without a planet's worth of resources. I'd say we need a better understanding of the interface between our systems and the terraforming tech, Jax replied. And maybe a backup for our backup. Redundancy, the most boring but essential part of space survival, Vex remarked, nodding. I can write some new protocols, add failsafes. Just in case the universe decides it's bored again and wants to mess with us, good. Let's not be the butt of the universe's joke any more than we have to, Theros said. She paused, glancing at her crew. And let's not forget the human factor. Juno's quick thinking probably saved our skins. Don't make me blush, Captain, Juno said, though she was clearly pleased. But yeah, maybe we should look into more flexible human inputs. You know, add a little more chaos to our order. Isn't that what got us into this mess? Dax asked, though his grin belied any real concern. Less mess, more adaptable, Juno corrected. Chaos is easy to control if you know how to channel it, Theros considered this. All right, so we focus on resilience. Better integration of our tech with that of the terraforming device. And a bit more freedom for the human element. Sounds like a plan, Meredith said, nodding. And if all else fails, we just keep doing what we're doing. Fly by the seat of our pants, which, according to Dax, we should ditch anyway, Vex said, earning more laughter. It was a strange thing, this camaraderie in the face of the universe's indifference. But it was what kept them going, what made them more than just a crew. It made them a family. And speaking of flying, Jax piped up, those thrusters still need a little love. Not to mention the reactor, of course they do, Theros sighed. All right, folks, let's get to it. We've got a ship to keep afloat and a universe not to fry. As the crew dispersed, each to their tasks, Theros lingered by the viewport, staring out into the endless stretch of stars. They weren't out of the woods yet. Hell, they'd never really be. But they were moving forward, and that was something. Captain, Vex called, drawing Theros' attention. About that drink, Theros chuckled, the warmth of her crew's banter still fresh. Yeah, Vex, I think we've earned it. As the bridge returned to the familiar rhythm of repair and renewal, Theros took a moment to reflect on their journey. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They'd faced down the universe and managed to carve out a small piece for themselves, madness and all. The universe might not care about individuals, but the Ether's cradle carried on with its ragtag crew, defiant in the face of cosmic indifference. As the stars twinkled like silent conspirators, Theros raised her head high, her resolve as unwavering as the constellations. Let's keep this show going, she murmured to herself, a smile tugging at her lips. We've got a universe to explore and a few more mysteries to unravel. With that, the Ether's cradle surged forward, a lone wanderer in a vast and indifferent cosmos. But no matter how wide the universe, they had each other and they had their ship, a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and a fair bit of lunacy. And so, with the stars as their constant companions and a renewed sense of purpose, they forged ahead into the unknown, not just surviving, but living. Against all odds, against the whims of fate, and with a healthy dose of humor, the Ether's cradle continued its journey through the great expanse, a beacon of humanity's stubborn refusal to go quietly into the night. Here's to us, Theros whispered, a toast to the unyielding spirit of her crew. And in the silence of space, her words carried weight, echoing through the corridors and into the hearts of her fellow misfits. Together, they would face whatever came next. And who knew? Maybe, just maybe, they'd even get it right once in a while.